everyone always asks me sort of what my background is, and I kind of start off with the first initial thing is I was all into fine dining. I used to be the chef of a restaurant here called True, where Rick Tremano was the head chef, and then I was underneath him, and we were all completely like super fine dining, right? Where you're doing a 12-course tasting menu. Before that, I worked in New York. Before that, I worked in Miami. But originally, I'm from South Carolina, so me and my father used to do a lot of barbecue in the backyard and grilling, kind of what more people typically think is grilling, which is like direct fire underneath the food. But then always people come to me and they always say, hey, I don't have a grill, or I live in Chicago on a high rise and I only have an oven. Is there a way for me to do traditional American barbecue or a style of that and still enjoy doing it and get those flavor profiles across? So what I've created here is basically a baby back rib that you can cook in an oven and then finish on the grill, or you can put it back and finish in the oven, okay? So the first thing I like to talk about is sort of classic American rubs, and that's what everyone thinks of as American barbecue. When you go to Texas, you're gonna be eating a lot of salt and pepper. When you go to the Carolinas, you're gonna be eating a lot of like this red rub that has a decent amount of sugar in it. And then obviously the regions of barbecue, and you can tell by the sauces that we have over here that we sell in grocery stores throughout the US, there's different regions and flavor profiles for each region of the United States. These are the ones, and I'll go through them kind of towards the end, of the regions that I prefer and the ones that I really love and fell in love with cooking. And we'll go through each region of the sauce in a minute. But the first part is you got to start off with quality meat, right? So I'll throw a little glove on here. I love using gloves at home even when I cook. One, it's easy just to hold things and then take the gloves off and your hands are clean. So we have a decent amount of gloves in. But when you talk about baby back ribs, okay, when you look at an animal or a pig standing up and down, the baby back rib is the rib that is closest to the spine, all right? So it's gonna have a little bit more curvature. It's gonna be a little bit more tender than the other ribs. And in my opinion, it's gonna have a little bit more flavor than the other ribs that come off a pig. So the three ribs, as you think about them, is if the pig is near the spine, you have the baby back that's close. You then have the spare rib. All right, the spare rib is composed of two pieces. The spare rib has the rib itself, and it also has the rib tips. Now, if you talk about St. Louis ribs, a lot of people have heard that, St. Louis style ribs or St. Louis cut, that's where they actually take the rib tip off, the one that's closest to the sternum bone. All right, they take those rib tips off and they create this perfect rectangle of ribs called a St. Louis rib or St. Louis cut. Obviously, it's called that because it was made famous in St. Louis by the butchers there. Those ribs will be very flat. They'll have a lot more fat to them or gristle to them and not as much flavor, and they won't be as tender as a baby back. So when I cook ribs at the restaurant, the only style that we do is baby back ribs, all right? Now, what I look for in any type of meat is obviously quality. So all our meat comes from, you know, great producers, small farms, animals that are raised properly, no hormones, you know, going in the direction that everyone's looking for with their quality of food. The main thing I also look at for a baby back rib, and when I hold these up, you can see, is that they're perfectly cut even as much as possible, right? So when I went to my producer, if you go to a grocery store, sometimes you'll see this a little bit smaller, this a little bit bigger. Now, the problem with that is the smaller piece will cook and finish before the bigger piece finishes, all right? That's not what we're looking to do, all right? We're looking for both this side and this side to finish at the same time. People always ask me the best way to find great meat, and that for me is actually going to talk to a butcher, all right? Whether you go to a place like Paulana Meat Market here in Chicago or Gephardt's or the Whole Foods Butcher, or you shop at Jewel here in Chicago or Mariano's, the best way to find the best quality of product that they have in-house at the time is to talk to that butcher behind the counter, right? Usually when I'm deciding what I'm gonna cook at home, I actually go in, talk to the butcher, he tells me this piece is best, and then I plan my meal around that, all right? They're gonna know what looks best that day, they're gonna know what just came in, they're gonna know what's coming from a great farm. Then when I actually look at the meat, you'll be able to tell what I'm looking for in any type of meat, and this be American steak like a ribeye or a filet, or this be pork. I'm looking for the fat that is actually in the striations of the lean meat, right? This is called intermuscular fat or marbling. The more marbling you have, the easier it's gonna be able to get a great product at the end, and the better tasting it's gonna be, right? Emerald says fat is flavor. That is 100% true. This is actually the good fat in the lean meat. The outside fat, or this white fat on the outside that's kind of more firm than the intermuscular fat, some of that is good, but when you get some pieces, they're really thick. I like to trim that down, right? Because I'm looking for this intermuscular fat. Even in a rib, you can see the striations of fat through this piece that comes off the loin and then through these pieces over here. The more of that, the better flavor is going to be, and the less you have to cook the product, because fat cooks faster than meat. If you think about American Wagyu meat or Wagyu beef, Kobe beef, right, from Japan, that has a ton of intermuscular fat in it. That's why you cook it really fast and short, and you don't go till well done, medium well, right? That just makes a piece of meat tough. So the idea behind American barbecue is we're trying to cook a piece of meat that get moved around a lot, okay? And if you think of an animal, any leg, chest muscle like a brisket, rump or butt area, the more the muscle gets used, the tougher the piece of meat, the longer you have to cook it to break down the intermuscular fibers to make it nice and lean and nice and soft, right? So if you think about braising, you're always going to use a part of the butt or a part of the leg, right? And when you think about grilling, you're going to use a fillet, which comes from the inside of the chest cavity and doesn't get moved around a lot, so it's very tender, right? Ribs, because they get moved around as the animal walks and steps and stands up, they're going to be a little bit tougher than you would say a beef fillet or a pork fillet or a pork loin. So normally if we were smoking this meat at a low temperature, right? American barbecue smoking is anywhere from 225 to 275 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so low and slow is what they say. What happens when you do it low and slow is it breaks down the muscle fibers in the meat, and it does it over a long period of time so that it comes out tender at the end, right? For this application in the oven, we created a way to get a rib in about approximately 2 to 2.5 hours, where normally it would take me 5 hours to cook the ribs at the restaurant, all right? So half the time. Now, when you have this rib here, you can see on the back, if you bought this at the grocery store, there may be a sheen of skin on the back. We take that sheen off. And the reason why is because it's like shoelaces or shoe leather. It's so tough that you can't get the rub into the meat. And what we're trying to do is cook long period of time to break down the muscle fiber, keep as much moisture in the meat as possible. All right? Now, as everyone knows, when you cook a steak, cooking a steak for a long time dries it out. So the cooking for a long time doesn't really go hand in hand. So we'll do things to help the meat stay moist, but also get a tender rib. So the first thing we do is we put on what we call a slather, all right? So a slather is something that you would brush onto the rib or brush onto the brisket or brush onto the pork shoulder to help, the rub adhere, 2, to help the meat penetrate it, 3, to build a layer of flavor. So as I think about American barbecue, I always think about layers of flavor as I cook. The first layer is obviously a great quality piece of meat. The second layer is this slather, right? So what I have here and what we use is our gold sauce. This is a South Carolina mustard and vinegar sauce. In South Carolina, a lot of German settlers came down and they had sausages and mustards with them. They then turned that into their barbecue sauce. So it's mustard and vinegar. So the first thing I do is I take your nice pastry brush, or you can go to Home Depot and even buy a 79-cent paintbrush, right? We're gonna dip this in here and we brush a layer on the pork rib. Doesn't have to be too thick. It can be as thick as you want it. The great thing, another reason that I use mustard is mustard has a decent amount of vinegar in it as well. And as you know, North Carolina barbecue, they serve it with vinegar. The idea is that the mustard helps pull the rub into the meat, right? And we're trying to flavor, if we were doing a pork shoulder or brisket, we're trying to get the flavor all the way into the middle, right? Without doing any type of injection or piercing the meat. So the first thing I do is the back side of the rib, I brush it with the Carolina Gold or gold. I stole this from a pizza place down the street from a piece. I'll return it later, but I like to use these shakers because they sprinkle the rub evenly. Now, when you think about rubs, we have 2 main rubs, and then this is a brisket pepper rub that we use, but the 2 main rubs are salt-based rubs and sugar-based rubs. For Southeast American barbecue, you always use what is this red-looking tinge rub, and it has some sugar in it. It also has salt in it too, but more sugar than salt. Now, sweetness goes really well with pork, all right? That's why you see an apple in the pig's mouth, right? Apples go well with pork. Peaches go well with pork. So the idea is that we're trying to take the pork that we have from a great farm and enhance the flavor, all right? So in this red rub, you have paprika, chili powder, sugar, oregano, some dark brown sugar, salt, pepper. You can look these up online. There's different recipes, but they're all very similar with chili powder and paprika as one of the main ingredients, all right? The salt-based rub, and salt is one of the greatest things that the earth has given us, because what salt does is actually enhance the flavors of other flavors, all right? I know when you taste salt, you're like, oh, that tastes like salt. But the idea behind salt is to bring out the flavor of the sugar, or bring out the flavor of the pork, or bring out the flavor of the mustard. One of the ways that we teach young chefs to taste things and season food is we'll take carrots, we'll put them in a pot, and we'll cook them till they're almost mush. We'll put them in one of those blitzers, and we'll blitz it. And then when you taste the carrot puree, or like the baby food, when you taste the carrot with no salt in it, it's going to taste very bland, all right? It's not going to have much taste at all. As you start to add salt and taste, and then you add a little bit more salt and taste, and then you add a little bit more salt and taste, what you're going to find is it's going to bring out the natural sweetness of carrots. If you've ever tasted a great carrot out of the garden, it actually tastes a little bit sweet. It doesn't taste like very savory, right? Salt brings out that flavor. What chefs are trying to do is season the food where it brings out that flavor, but you don't taste salt, all right? Everyone else's salt palate is a little bit different, so sometimes it's a little bit salty to people, sometimes it's a little bit under-seasoned. But so back to the rib, we brush on the gold sauce, we'll lay that to the side. We have this shaker with the Carolina dirt rub in it. It's called that because the mud in the Carolinas looks like red mud. And we'll shake this from above like it's snowing in Chicago. It's a little too cold to snow today, but. And as you can tell, we're putting a hefty amount on the rib where you cannot see any of the meat or any of the rub, or sauce, sorry, on the pork itself. The idea behind that is, again, we're trying to season meats that are very thick and cook for a long time, so we want to get a good amount of rub on. Also, when you go to flip it, some of it falls off. All right, when you go to put it in the smoker, some will fall off. Now, some people always ask me, can you do the rub ahead of time? Or how often do you season the meat before you actually cook it? I've actually had some barbecue chefs that compete in the competitions like I do, and they will rub their meat, they'll rub their ribs the night before, then they'll pull them out of the fridge, then they'll wipe them off, then they'll put more rub on them, right? I haven't found that necessary for any flavor. I do like those people because I sell rub, all right? It's more rub for me to sell. I've found there's no gain in flavor by seasoning the meat any more than 30 minutes in advance, all right? That's from a steak to a pork, to a turkey, to a chicken, right? Rubbing it more than 30 minutes does not give it any more flavor than it would if you rubbed it the night before, all right? Flip over the other side. I did the back side first because this is the presentation side of the rib. A lot of people eat with their eyes first, and we're trying to make sure the rib comes out beautiful, right? So I do the meaty side last. Again, I'll take this gold sauce, brush it on. This will help pull in the rub. It'll also help flavor the meat as another layer. Okay? Sprinkle that in. Then I take the same rub dirt and I sprinkle it nice and even with the shaker. Again, you don't want to see any mustard or any of the pork itself. All right, we're trying to flavor. A lot of people ask me, oh, I only season one side of the ribs. I said, well, I eat both sides. That's why I season both sides. All right, so as you can tell, there's a decent amount of rub on both sides. Now, if you were going to smoke this or you were going to grill this, the idea behind smoking or American barbecue is indirect heat, okay? Grilling, or when most people say, oh, I'm going to a barbecue, they're actually going to a grilling event, all right? Barbecue, like I said, is low and slow, 225 to 275. The way you accomplish that is indirect heat, okay? Indirect heat basically means the fire may be over here, but the food is over here, all right? So you've all seen those smokers probably that have a big chamber and the firebox is over here. It's called an indirect or offset smoker. As they light the fire, that's hotter than 275. So as the smoke travels over to the meat, it cools down. So you want 225 to 275 by the meat. So if you were doing this in a Weber kettle, just your typical little charcoal grill, you would place the fire on one side of the grill and you would put the meat on the other. If you were going to do a gas grill, you would turn maybe these two burners on over here and you would put the food on the side the burners aren't on. You would control the temperature with the thing to make the temperature by the meat 225 to 275, all right? You can do that with a little oven thermometer. Just set it right next to the meat. We're going to do this in an oven, but we're going to try to speed it up. So we've set our oven at 375. Now, because this has a lot of sugar in it, if you directly put this over the flame or you directly put it in the oven at 375, the sugar would burn on the outside before the meat actually gets cooked. So the idea is if you're using one of these type of rubs, it needs to be indirect heat or it needs to be at the end of cooking, the last 5 minutes, the last 10 minutes. A lot of American barbecue sauces, mainly these ones that look like normal sauce, have a decent amount of sugar in them as well. That's why you see people baste with a brush on a grill the last 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, right? Because the sugar gets too black. So, we have our baby back rib rubbed. Now we're going to go into tin foil. All right? Tin foil is going to help in a couple ways. You can see here I have a shiny side and I have a dull side. All right? A lot of people get confused, but there are sides for a reason. The shiny side actually brings the heat to the item. If you've ever cooked scalloped potatoes and you peeled off the tin foil and then there's some like tin foil left on your potatoes, that's because the shiny side's not supposed to touch the food. All right? So we have this dull side where the food goes. We'll take this rib, we'll move it to the inside. If we mess up the rub a little bit, we'll just kind of sprinkle some more on. Now, if this was a competition, you would already have smoked these ribs for about 2 hours, right? Then you would put them in the tin foil just like we're doing now. And the reason you do that is because we're trying to break down the muscle fibers. When you put this in the tin foil, the natural pork juices drip out, they tend to start to steam, and the steam is what breaks down the rib or breaks down any type of meat. So we do the wrapping when we cook American barbecue as well. We start in the smoker, then we wrap, then we pull it out. Okay? In this tin foil, you could add apple juice, beer, pineapple juice, any type of liquid to help flavor the rib that you want and to help steam. All right? For this one, we just kind of wrap it up. Now, I've ripped these a little bit longer than the rib. What I'm going to do is fold this over. I do it pretty tight, right? Then I wrap this up just like a little pouch, okay? At this point, I'm going to take the rib and I'm going to put it into a 375-degree oven. Oh, the bottom one? That's a nice microwave, though. So we're going to put the rib in the oven at 375. Now, to speed this process up, we're going to cook it for 1.5 to 2 hours. All right? That way, your rib will be completely tender. The idea is that you will start to see the meat come down from the rib bone like 1/8 of an inch. All right? You'll also be able to pull the ribs apart basically when they're done. Okay? So as that cooks for 1.5 to 2 hours, basically what's happening is it's steaming inside, and when that steam starts to break down the meat, it's also going to start to cook the rub. The rub's going to start to penetrate. All right? Now, you will not have any type of smoke ring to the meat in the oven. But what a lot of misnomer is, when you smoke food, it kind of turns pink, right? The outside of the meat gets smoke on it. Now, what happens is the myoglobin, or the chemical that makes our blood look red, actually turns the meat pink when it reacts to the chemical of the smoke. So the idea is that even chicken will look pink when it's completely fully cooked, when you smoke an item. This process, you won't really have that too much. Now, pork will look a little pink because that's what its natural color is. But you won't have the nice smoke ring. Another misnomer is that when you smoke food, you always have that smoke ring. That's not the case, all right? At a certain temperature, the pink turns back to brown when you get really high, like the 190s, all right? That's why brisket, sometimes you'll see a smoke ring and sometimes you won't. You may see like a darker edge around the outside. But smoke, for me, is a flavoring agent, okay? So the first layer you have is great pork. Then you have the slather. Then you have the rub, all right? We're on layer 3. Now we put in the tinfoil, we got layer 4, all right, with a juice or just the natural juices from the pork, all right? So we'll pull these ones out after they've been in an hour and a half. So we have these ones over here just kind of holding. You can see as I take these out, this oven's only at 150. My hands are pretty used to that temperature already. You might want to grab a glove to take them out. My fingertips have been burned off so many times, I don't feel it anymore. So you can see I did the exact same thing. I have this little pouch. We're going to flip it over, and then we're going to open it up, and then you're going to get this nice, see it steaming. You have this nice, like, beautiful, dark rub where the sugar starts to caramelize, and then you can see if I pick this rib up, it's probably going to break apart a little bit, but you can see how the bones, the meat starts to pull back from the top of the bone. All right, we'll lay this over here. All right. So this was in the oven for an hour and a half to 2 hours. At the hour and a half mark, I just say check it, all right, and make sure. Most likely it's going to take the full 2 hours. All right. Now you have a fully cooked rib. This will pull apart when you pull it. The misnomer of fall off the bone ribs is not a good idea in my opinion. Fall off the bone means the meat's overcooked. It's turned to mush, right? We don't want the meat to we don't want to be able to pull that bone out as soon as you take it out of the tinfoil. If you like it that way, that's okay. You would cook the ribs longer in the oven, all right? If we were doing this on a smoker, we call this the 2-2-1 method, all right? 2 hours on the smoker or grill getting smoke, 2 hours in tinfoil on the grill still, then take it out of the grill like we just did, or out of the tinfoil and put it back on the grill for another hour. So if you're cooking ribs on a Weber kettle or gas grill or smoker, it's called 2-2-1 for the size baby back we have. This rib, when we first started raw, was 2 pounds and a quarter, all right? So it basically means 2 1/4 pounds and down is the way they size it. And you can buy 1.5 and down, 3 and down, right? The bigger the rib, the longer the time in the oven. If you do this size, 2.25 pounds, it's going to be roughly 2 hours in the oven at 375. Now, the last layer is we want to like glaze the rib, all right? Make it pretty, make it look good. So what we can do is we'll take our little pastry brush. Now, glazing usually comes with more sugar, right? You could take the rib out of the oven and move it to the grill now and start to glaze, all right, for 5-10 minutes. Or we can brush this sauce on and then we can go right back in the 375-degree oven for 5 or 10 minutes. Basically what we're trying to do, the rib is completely cooked. We're just trying to get another layer of flavor, and we're also trying to like make it look a little bit prettier, right? A nice sheen on the rib instead of this dull rub look. All right, so what we do is, the sauce I have here is called Smoky. This is the most traditional sauce that we sell, the most like any other sauce you would find in the grocery store. This is sweet and smoky, all right? Because you use this sauce, the rib will have a smoky flavor to it, even though you didn't smoke it at all or cook it with real wood or charcoal, all right? So we'll take the smoky sauce and then we just kind of brush it on, again, the outside. You can do this multiple times. If I'm gonna glaze for 15 minutes, I'll brush this sauce on every 5 minutes, right? And you can see, hopefully in the mirror, how the rib gets a nice color and nice sheen on it. The other thing it does is it builds another layer. Now, again, what you don't want to do is turn this rib over and put it directly over the fire or over heat, because the sugar in there will definitely burn, right? So what I would do is put this back in the oven, let it set, basically. It'll start to like not harden up, but kind of cook a little bit. Then I would do it for another 5 minutes, Then in another 5 minutes, I would do it again. But when it's completely done, right, and you can glaze if you wanted to glaze 6 times. The other thing that you could do is you could use something else to glaze with. Usually a glaze has some type of sugar in it. All right, so it could be apple jam, peach chutney, any of those type of things, you can put another layer of flavor. All right, so when the rib is done, all right, you will see, if you look at the back side, you can see how it starts to split away from a couple bones. But basically, you can hold the rib up, and then you can pull it apart with barely any effort. All right? That's a good cooked rib. Now you can see, hopefully inside, it's still got a bunch of moisture, but it's not fall off the bone. Again, you can just rip a bone next, but it doesn't fall and just break as you hold it. All right? That's where I consider it's a good cooked rib. All right? So, process again, and the layers of flavor are great meat, then you do a slather, then you do the rub, then it goes in the tin foil with another layer, in the oven, back out for another glaze for another layer of flavor. All right? So that's the sort of method. 375, 2 hours, then glaze it at the end every 5 minutes for 15 minutes with either one of our sauces or your favorite barbecue sauce. Now, to go through these a little bit, there's regions of barbecue in America, and there's little nuances to each one. When I was doing the competition circuit, when we won the World Championships of Barbecue in Memphis, we used these 2 sauces. Right? These are sweet and smoky Memphis-style sauces. All right? Hot, smoky, and smoky. This one just has more cayenne pepper in it, so if you like a little spice. Western North Carolina, this one, all right, has a blue label. The western side of the state still uses ketchup or tomato product in their sauce, but they use a lot of vinegar. So this is a vinegar and tomato sauce. So if you like a little bit more tangy sauce, less sweet, this is probably your winner. These 2 are our best sellers in stores. Now, when you go to the eastern side of the state, you've all seen them, they cook these whole pigs, right? Then they take all the meat and fat and they chop it together with these big cutting boards with big butcher knives. Then they pour this juice all over it. This is the juice. It's straight vinegar and spices. This one has some heat too. The reason they use vinegar is because when they chop up all that meat and fat, it's very unctuous and they want to cut the fat. So they use vinegar to do that. Now, my home state and my favorite sauce, which is Gold. Like I said before, German settlers, they use mustard with their sausages. They brought mustard and vinegar, all right? This one is the oddball out, which most people are like, that can't be a barbecue sauce, but it is. This is from northern Alabama. This is called Ivory. This is a mayo and vinegar sauce, all right? So in the South, in Alabama, they basically smoke whole chickens, and then they dunk it in the vat of this sauce, like a 50-gallon drum. It's super healthy, all right? In the restaurant, we actually take this bottle, and we pour it on our cabbage, and we make coleslaw that quick, all right? It's also great in like egg salad, potato salad, on chicken. They eat it on pulled pork as well. This is hot pepper vinegar. This is like what we use for collard greens. And then like I talked about, we have the Q-Rub, the original Carolina Dirt, which is like your traditional barbecue rub. And then we have a cracked pepper that we use on brisket, all right? So that's how you get a nice rib in the oven when you need it in a short amount of time. If you had longer and you had a smoker and grill, you can do the 2-2-1 method. But overall, you're gonna get a great rib, baby back, if you do that method pretty spot on, all right? If there's any questions, I can answer those. Yes, sir.
What about liquid smoke?
So a lot of people have a misconception of liquid smoke, that it's some kind of fake smoke flavor. There are products on the market that are fake smoke flavor, but there's a company called Wrights, W-R-I-G-H-T-S. It comes in a red bottle. What they actually do is they burn a lot of wood and it goes up a big chimney. And on that chimney is like a hat, right? A cold piece of metal. As the smoke rises, it condenses on that metal and then drips down into a container. That's what liquid smoke is, recondensed smoke, right? So you can get liquid smoke that is good and a totally natural product from burning wood. We don't use it on our barbecue, but if you wanted to add some smoky flavor to a baked rib, right, then you could add it in your glaze, you could add it in your slather, all right? You're gonna wanna put it in the liquid. Now, that stuff is very concentrated, so you need like a drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. You wanna taste it. One of the things that I wanna do when I cook barbecue, and I learned this from doing fine dining, was I'm trying to balance all my flavors, right? I want everything to be in balance. So I want you to taste the natural pork, I want you to taste the rub, and I want you to taste the smoke, but I don't want you to eat this rib and go, oh, that's super smoky, right? That's not a balanced rib for me. So if someone leaves my restaurant and says, oh, that was great smoked food, that's not a winner for me. I want you to taste all the attributes of what I'm trying to give you, and smoke is a flavoring agent, just like the rub, just like salt. The more smoke you put on something, the more bitter it tastes to your mouth. So that's why people, a lot of like women in general, they don't like that bitter taste, right? So they don't like really smoky things. It also changes by the wood you use, whether you use hickory or mesquite or whether you use peach wood, right? I smoke all my products with fruit woods. So either mainly peach wood, because I'm from South Carolina where there's a lot of peach orchards, or apple wood or pecan wood, all right? All hardwoods. In Texas, because they're cooking a lot of beef, because that's where all the cattle farms are, they use post oak, mainly because they walk in their backyard and just chop it down, all right? Post oak has a lot more smoky flavor than apple wood, right? So if you were smoking a fish, you're gonna wanna use more of a lighter smoke, like apple or peach, right? You're gonna smoke beef, maybe you do wanna use hickory or post oak, all right? So, but liquid smoke to me is not this criminal thing to use, right? It's got a misnomer, sort of like MSG, so.
If you were preparing a brisket that way, how long would you cook it?
In the oven? So I've never done a brisket in an oven, but when I cook my brisket, I usually smoke it for 12 hours, rest it for 12 hours. All right, so it's a 24-hour process. You could probably cut the time in half by going to 375, but you're gonna wanna put it in tin foil. And the whole brisket, like the point and the flat, if you put the probe right in the middle section, you're gonna want that to say 190 degrees when it's done. And then you're gonna let it rest on your counter for 2 or 3 hours, just to kind of come back to 150 degrees. When that probe in the middle says 190, you pull it out. When it says 150, that's when you can slice it and eat it again. I'd probably do it if you're in the oven at 375, it would probably only take like 6 hours. I smoke it for 12 at 275 degrees. And then I let it rest. The longer you can let a meat rest, right? Resting meats is very key. Okay, what happens when you cook meats is the heat makes the water move really fast inside. And if you slice a steak and all the juice comes on the cutting board, you just lost all your moisture and all your flavor. People are like, oh, look at all that juice. And I'm like, oh, no, look at all that juice on the cutting board, right? So the idea is the bigger piece of meat, the longer rest. So a chicken breast, 5 minutes. A steak, 10 minutes. A turkey, 45 minutes. A brisket, 12 hours, right? It just all depends on what piece of meat you're cooking, but resting is very key to keeping the meat moist and flavorful. Any other questions? If you have anything afterwards, I'll be hanging around so you can come up and chat, but I appreciate you guys having me at the International Housewares Show, and it's a great rib to cook, so.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Chef Charlie McKenna.